Section 1. You have just arrived at the student hostel where you will live during the term. The manager is explaining the rules and another student is asking questions. Listen to the conversation and complete the form. First, you have some time to look at questions 1 to 5 on the Student Hostel Charges for Meals form. You will see that there is an example which has been done for you. The conversation relating to this will be played first.
Excuse me, I want to ask you about the charges for meals. Are they the same as they were last year?
No, I'm afraid they're not. We've managed to keep most of them the same, but we've had to increase the charge for breakfast.
How much is it now?
It's $2.50. It used to be $2.
I see. What about lunch?
It's unchanged, still $3.
Breakfast costs $2.50, so the change has been written in. Lunch still costs $3, so the information has been ticked. Now we shall begin. You should answer the questions as you listen because you will not hear the recording a second time. Now listen carefully and answer questions 1 to 5.
Excuse me, I want to ask you about the charges for meals. Are they the same as they were last year?
No, I'm afraid they're not. We've managed to keep most of them the same, but we've had to increase the charge for breakfast.
How much is it now?
It's $2.50. It used to be $2.
I see. What about lunch?
It's unchanged, still $3.
Does dinner still cost $3?
Yes, it does. We've managed to keep the prices down this year, but the best deal is the 3-meal plan for $48 per week. We give you vouchers to present when you come into the cafeteria, and you get 21 meals for your $48. That works out to a little more than $2 a meal. The 2-meal plan is also at last year's rates of $36 per week. We give you vouchers for that too.
My sister was in this hostel before me. I'm sure the hours for breakfast used to be longer.
Yes, they were. They used to be 7 to 9:30, but to keep our expenses down, we made them 7 to 9.
Lunch is the way it was, though. Hold on, dinner, 6 to 7:30, isn't that a change?
Yes, it is, and in fact the form is wrong. It used to be 5:30 to 7:30, but now it's 6 to 8 p.m.
6 to 8 p.m, that's good.
So, which plan would you like?
I'd like to think about it, please. I need to check my lecture schedule.
Now look at questions 6 to 8. Listen to the conversation between the student and the manager and match the places in questions 6 to 8 to the appropriate letters A to F on the map.
Can you tell me how to get to my room, please?
Of course. You're in the new wing, which is very freshly painted and pleasant. But I'm afraid you're going to have to go to a couple of other offices before you can have the key. You're in the admissions office now. Leave this office and turn right and go to the end of the hall. The last office is the fees office, where you can pay the balance of your room deposit. They'll give you a receipt.
Okay.
After you've been to the fees office, come back past admissions. You'll see a very large room at the northwestern corner of the building. You can't miss it. That's the student lounge, and if you go in there, you can meet some of the other students and see who'll have a room near you.
That's good. Can I get a cup of coffee there?
Yes, there's a vending machine in the corner. Then go to the key room, which is opposite the lift and next to the library. Show them your receipt, and you can pick up your key there.
My luggage was sent on ahead. Do you know where I should collect it?
The box room is next to the women's toilet. You'll have to get the key from the key room.
Thank you.
That is the end of section 1. You will now have some time to check your answers.
Now turn to section 2. Section 2. You will hear a man who owns a holiday home talking on the phone to a woman who is staying there. First, you have some time to look at questions 11 to 13. Now listen carefully and answer questions 11 to 13.
Hello?
Hi, it's Laura Carlton here. We've just arrived at the holiday flat, but I can't get the hot water and heating to work.
Oh, right. That's easy. Don't worry. In the upstairs cupboard, you'll find the water heater. You'll see 3 main controls on the left at the bottom of the heater. The first one, the round one on the far left, is the most important one for the heating and hot water. It's the main control switch. Make sure it's in the on position. The switch itself doesn't light up, but the little square below will be black if the switch is off. That's probably what's happened. It's got switched off by mistake. The middle one of these 3 controls, you'll see it's slightly larger than the first one, controls the radiators. If you feel cold while you're there and need the radiators on, this needs to be turned to maximum. The last of the 3 controls, the one on the right, is usually on about a number 4 setting, which for the water in the taps is usually quite hot enough. Below the heating controls in the middle is a small round plastic button. If there isn't enough water in the pipes, sometimes the heater goes out. If this happens, you'll need to press this button to reset the heater. Hold it in for about 5 seconds and the heater should come on again. Then there's a little square indicator under the 3rd knob that's a kind of alarm light. It'll flash if you need to reset the heater.
It sounds complicated.
I'm sure you won't have any problems with it. There should be some more instructions on the side of the heater. Call me back if you can't make it work.
Okay. Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 14 to 20. Now listen and answer questions 14 to 20. While you're on the phone, we haven't managed to find a few things we need, like extra pillows for the beds and some washing powder. Is there any here?
Pillows, yes. If you look in the cupboard, the large white one upstairs, to the left of the bathroom door, there should be 4 or 5 on the top shelf. And if you want to do some washing, there's some powder for that, probably by the back door. There's a kind of shelf there above the sink. In fact, I'm sure there's some there in a large blue box. You need about half a cupful for each wash. Oh, and that reminds me. The spare key to the back door is hanging on a hook on the wall by the sitting room window. Please make sure to put it back when you've used it. The previous guest lost it in the garden and I had to get another one made. And if you have any trouble with the lamps, you'll find some spare bulbs in a large cardboard box. It's on top of the washing machine with all kinds of useful things in it. Oh, and another thing I forgot to mention when we last spoke.
Yes?
I've left you a local map, so you'll be able to find your way around easily. It shows the whole area. I put it in the top drawer of the chest under the TV in your bedroom. There's a whole file of local information in there too.
Thanks. What about visiting the town? Can you give us any advice?
Yes. You'll need to take the car. It's too far to walk from the flat, really. You have to pay to leave your car in all the car parks now, I'm afraid. I like the one that's by the station best, and you can walk to the town centre from there in 5 minutes. That's where all the best restaurants are. But if you want a takeaway, the Italian one does really good pasta and pizzas. Call 732281 for that one, or 766119 for the Chinese. They're both good, and they'll both deliver to the flat. As for places to visit, yes, do go and see the Railway Museum. The exhibition is small, but really good. It gets very crowded on Sundays, so I suggest you visit it on a quieter day, later in the week, but not on Thursdays, which is market day. You won't find anywhere to park, and it's also the only day of the week when they're not open. Anything else?
Not for the moment. Thanks. That is the end of section 2. You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Section 3. You will hear two biology students called Emma and Jack discussing an experiment they are going to do together. First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 25. Now listen carefully and answer questions 21 to 25.
We've got to choose a topic for our experiment, haven't we, Jack? Were you thinking of something to do with seeds?
That's right. I thought we could look at seed germination, how a seed begins to grow.
Okay. Any particular reason? I know you're hoping to work in plant science eventually.
Yeah, but practically everything we do is going to feed into that. No, there's an optional module on seed structure and function in the 3rd year that I might do. So I thought it might be useful for that. If I choose that option, I don't have to do a dissertation module.
Good idea.
Well, I thought for this experiment, we could look at the relationship between seed size and the way the seeds are planted. So we could plant different sized seeds in different ways and see which grow best.
Okay. We'd need to allow time for the seeds to come up.
That should be fine if we start now. A lot of the other possible experiments need quite a bit longer.
So that'd make it a good one to choose. And I don't suppose it'd need much equipment. We're not doing chemical analysis or anything. Though that's not really an issue. We've got plenty of equipment in the laboratory.
Yeah, we need to have a word with the tutor if we're going to go ahead with it, though. I'm sure our aim's okay. It's not very ambitious, but the assignment's only 10% of our final mark, isn't it? But we need to be sure we're the only ones doing it.
Yeah, it's only 5% actually, but it'd be a bit boring if everyone was doing it.
Did you read that book on seed germination on our reading list?
The one by Graves.
Hmm.
I looked through it for my last experiment, though it wasn't all that relevant there. It would be for this experiment, though. I found it quite hard to follow. Lots about the theory, which I hadn't expected.
Yes, I'd been hoping for something more practical. It does include references to the recent findings on genetically modified seeds, though.
Yes, that was interesting.
I read an article about seed germination by Lee Hall.
About seeds that lie in the ground for ages and only germinate after a fire.
That's the one. I knew a bit about it already, but not about this research. His analysis of figures comparing the times of the fires and the proportion of seeds that germinated was done in a lot of detail. Very impressive.
Was that the article with the illustrations of early stages of plant development? They were very clear.
I think those diagrams were in another article.
Before you hear the rest of the discussion, you have some time to look at questions 26 to 30. Now listen and answer questions 26 to 30.
Anyway, shall we have a look at the procedure for our experiment? We'll need to get going with it quite soon.
Right. So the first thing we have to do is find our seeds. I think vegetable seeds would be best, and obviously they mustn't all be the same size. So how many sorts do we need? About 4 different ones?
I think that would be enough. There'll be quite a large number of seeds for each one.
Then for each seed, we need to find out how much it weighs and also measure its dimensions. And we need to keep a careful record of all that.
That'll be quite time-consuming. And we also need to decide how deep we're going to plant the seeds. Right on the surface, a few millimeters down, or several centimeters.
Okay, so then we get planting. Do you think we can plant several seeds together in the same plant pot?
No, I think we need a different one for each seed.
Right. And we'll need to label them. We can use different coloured labels. Then we wait for the seeds to germinate. I reckon that'll be about 3 weeks, depending on what the weather's like. Then we see if our plants have come up and write down how tall they've grown.
Then all we have to do is look at our numbers and see if there's any relation between them.
That's right. So then we get...
That is the end of section 3. You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turn to section 4. Section 4. You will hear part of a lecture about a way of reducing the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. First, you have some time to look at questions 31 to 40. Now listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 40. As we saw in the last lecture, a major cause of climate change is the rapid rise in the level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere over the last century. If we could reduce the amount of CO2, perhaps the rate of climate change could also be slowed down. One potential method involves enhancing the role of the soil that plants grow in with regard to absorbing CO2.
Ratan Lau, a soil scientist from Ohio State University in the USA, claims that the world's agricultural soils could potentially absorb 13% of the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, the equivalent of the amount released in the last 30 years, and research is going on into how this might be achieved. Lau first came to the idea that soil might be valuable in this way, not through an interest in climate change, but rather out of concern for the land itself and the people dependent on it. Carbon-rich soil is dark, crumbly and fertile, and retains some water. But erosion can occur if soil is dry, which is a likely effect if it contains inadequate amounts of carbon. Erosion is of course bad for people trying to grow crops or breed animals on that terrain. In the 1970s and 80s, Lau was studying soils in Africa, so devoid of organic matter that the ground had become extremely hard, like cement. There he met a pioneer in the study of global warming, who suggested that carbon from the soil had moved into the atmosphere. This is now looking increasingly likely. Let me explain. For millions of years, carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere have been regulated, in part, by a natural partnership between plants and microbes, tiny organisms in the soil. Plants absorb CO2 from the air and transform it into sugars and other carbon-based substances. While a proportion of these carbon products remain in the plant, some transfer from the roots to fungi and soil microbes, which store the carbon in the soil. The invention of agriculture some 10,000 years ago disrupted these ancient soil-building processes and led to the loss of carbon from the soil. When humans started draining the natural topsoil and ploughing it up for planting, they exposed the buried carbon to oxygen. This created carbon dioxide and released it into the air. And in some places, grazing by domesticated animals has removed all vegetation, releasing carbon into the air. Tons of carbon have been stripped from the world's soils, where it's needed, and pumped into the atmosphere. So, what can be done? Researchers are now coming up with evidence that even modest changes to farming can significantly help to reduce the amount of carbon in the atmosphere. Some growers have already started using an approach known as regenerative agriculture. This aims to boost the fertility of soil and keep it moist through established practices. These include keeping fields planted all year round and increasing the variety of plants being grown. Strategies like these can significantly increase the amount of carbon stored in the soil, so agricultural researchers are now building a case for their use in combating climate change. One American investigation into the potential for storing CO2 on agricultural lands is taking place in California. Soil scientist Wendy Silver of the University of California, Berkeley, is conducting a first-of-its-kind study on a large cattle farm in the state. She and her students are testing the effects on carbon storage of the compost that is created from waste, both agricultural, including manure and corn stalks, and waste produced in gardens, such as leaves, branches, and lawn trimmings. In Australia, soil ecologist Christine Jones is testing another promising soil enrichment strategy. Jones and 12 farmers are working to build up soil carbon by cultivating grasses that stay green all year round. Like composting, the approach has already been proved experimentally. Jones now hopes to show that it can be applied on working farms and that the resulting carbon capture can be accurately measured. It's hoped in the future that projects such as these will demonstrate the role that farmers and other land managers can play in reducing the harmful effects of greenhouse gases. For example, in countries like the United States, Where most farming operations use large applications of fertilizer, changing such long-standing habits will require a change of system. Ratan Lal argues that farmers should receive payment, not just for the corn or beef they produce, but also for the carbon they can store in their soil. Another study being carried out.
That is the end of section 4. You now have half a minute to check your answers.